Good evening. Welcome to CSL Book Shorts. It's Wednesday night. Yay! Tonight I'll be reading out of the book The Gentle Art of Blessings by Pierre Pradervand. And on the back of the book, I'll just read a little bit here. It says, Pradervand describes blessing as genuinely wishing the best for another person through seeing their individual worth and honoring them for it. By looking at several different perspectives, providing spiritual inspiration from Hinduism, Taoism, the Quran, the Bible, and other important spiritual sources, the gentle art of blessing explores the potential in shifting one's attitude from confrontation and negativity to acceptance and enthusiasm. A powerfully simple way of perceiving and shaping our surroundings. Blessings can reflect the unconditional love and acceptance that is necessary for world and inner peace. I thought this was so appropriate during our times right now with all of the unrest going on and all of the division in our country. And so I would like to read chapter 6 out of his book. So he has some chapters where you'll see what I'm reading, but in the back, he also has different blessings that he has written up for specific reasons. A blessing for yourself. What else does he have here? Blessings for a nurse, a blessing for parents. So those are all kind of in the back of the book. But tonight, I'm going to read The Golden Rule. So up at the top here, he has this little, he must have written it. It's not attributed to anyone else. It says, as you walk, bless the city in which you live, its government and teachers, its nurses and street sweepers, its children and bankers, its priests and prostitutes. The minute anyone expresses the least aggression or unkindness to you, respond with a blessing. Bless them totally, sincerely, joyfully. For such blessings are a shield that protects them from the ignorance of their misdeed and deflects the arrow that was aimed at you. It's beautiful. He says, if we expressed aggression, hostility, fear, or lack of kindness towards someone, would we not prefer them to react with love, trust, and forgiveness rather than respond to us in kind? The reply to this question is so evident that the question itself sounds rather artificial. You may be well aware of the Golden Rule, which states, therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. Matthew 7:12. This is the essence of all true religion. Is it not fascinating to realize that most of the great world religions teach exactly the same thing? The Islamic Sunnah tradition states, no one of you is a believer until he desires for his brother that which he desires for himself. In Brahmanism, the orthodox form of Hinduism, it says, this is the sum of duty. Do not unto others that which would cause you pain if done to you. In Judaism, we find the following statement. What is hateful to you, do not to our fellow man. That is the entire law. All the rest is commentary. Buddhist practice recommends, hurt not others in ways that you find hurtful. Confucianism addresses its followers thus. Surely it is the maxim of loving kindness. Do not unto others that which you would not have done unto you. In Taoism, the Golden Rule is stated as follows. Regard your neighbor's gain as your gain and your neighbor's losses as your losses. Zoroastrianism, which originated in Persia, upholds that nature alone is good, which refrains from doing unto another whatsoever is not good for itself. The impact of the Golden Rule goes still much further when you apply it not only to your behavior, but also your thoughts, because your thoughts form the basis for all your words and deeds. This expanded Golden Rule would read, think of others exactly in the same way you would want them to think of you. There can be no more demanding and stimulating spiritual discipline than this. No practice that requires more effort and perseverance, and blessing is one of the most privileged paths of getting there. Blessing as armor is the subtitle. Blessing those who attack us in any manner, in word or deed, truly constitutes impenetrable armor and prevents the arrows aimed at us from wounding us inside, even if we are touched physically. For the minute we are clothed with this love, such blessings express, we are no longer at the mercy of outside circumstances, people, forces, or events. A few years ago, I was accompanying an African peasant leader and friend, Demba, to the Geneva train station after he had spent a few days at my home. Just before reaching the station, I noticed a man I had already seen a few weeks before, almost at the same spot. Rarely in my existence had I seen a face expressing such desolation, eyes so empty and drained of any trace of life. I had spontaneously blessed him then. This time, I was carrying 2 very heavy suitcases. We passed each other, and for a split second, our eyes met. For an instant, I thought, this poor fellow must be drugged. Then, as he passed me, he punched me with great force on the mouth and nose and ran off at full speed. I fell flat out on the pavement, and blood started pouring from my nose. Without a second's hesitation, I started blessing him and encouraged Demba, who was at a total loss, to do the same. We continued to the train track. In less than 2 minutes, the bleeding had stopped. My friend was the one who needed to be consoled. Back home, I washed my face without even giving a glance at my appearance, including the swollen lip. A few hours later, my wife, Ellie, returned home and did not notice a thing. If I had run after the man, aside from the unpleasant altercation that would certainly have ensued, the hemorrhage would have been seriously aggravated by the adrenaline pumped into my system as the result of my anger. The complete calm that filled me, the feelings of sincere compassion I felt for the man, enabled an exceptionally rapid healing. The real victim in this situation was the man who had reacted violently, certainly without even knowing why he had behaved in this manner. Of course, I couldn't help asking myself why this had happened. What was the lesson I was supposed to learn? A few weeks later, I took a workshop with a spiritual teacher, Eileen Cady, at the Findhorn Foundation in Scotland. Possibly the first eco-spiritual community in the world, Findhorn was founded in the 60s by Eileen and her husband, Peter, and Dorothy McLean. I told her of the incident, and without a moment's hesitation, she said, "Stop punching yourself." At the time, I still indulged in the useless habit of berating myself, sometimes rather ferociously, for what I considered my shortcomings. Hence, the outside event was simply the translation of an inner state of mind that needed correcting. What a marvelous place the universe is when we learn to read its messages. They do not all come in such an abrupt manner, thank God, but they come as we need them and as we are ready to understand. When the inspiration for the text on the gentle art of blessing came to me sometime before this encounter on the street, it included this sentence: when some unexpected event knocks down your plans and you also, burst into blessing. For life is teaching you a lesson, and the very event you believe to be unwanted, you yourself called forth, so as to learn the lesson you might balk against were you not to bless it. Okay? This was precisely what had happened at the Geneva train station and what Eileen was inspired to explain in her unique manner. The gift of spirit lessons, another subtitle. Since that incident, I have learned to be much gentler toward myself. I have also learned that with the persistent and stubborn gentleness that characterized it, life places on our path exactly the kind of experiences appropriate to teaching us the lessons we need to learn at any given moment. When we begin to learn that constant progression spirit word is fundamental law of the universe, existence becomes tremendously exciting because absolutely every event can become an opportunity to learn a needed lesson or to discover some powerful new vista. I have at moments the clear vision that my life is programmed for perfection. Life, the universal law of harmony, our divine mother, infinite love, will not let go of us until we have learned whatever we need to learn to graduate to a higher level of consciousness, where we will have new lessons. It may well have been an insight of this kind into the incredibly beautiful, considerate, loving functioning of the law of constant progression that enabled Paul to claim that he glorified in tribulations and prompted the Apostle James to state, when all kinds of trials and temptations crowd into your lives, my brothers, don't resent them as intruders, but welcome them as friends. Immediately after my train station experience, I felt something precious had come my way. It was first and foremost a gift of grace, for the strength I had discovered had nothing to do with the little human ego making big efforts to control itself. You could say I felt almost like an observer of what was happening. It brought to mind a passage from the commentary of the Hindu's holy scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, by the great Indian spiritual master Sri Aurobindo. When our actions repose on the Brahman, the Godhead, he writes, the personality of the instrumental doer ceases. Though he acts, he does nothing, for he has given up not only the fruits of his works, but the works themselves and the doing of them to the Lord. In other words, at a certain level of understanding, we become aware of the fact that the Supreme Being becomes the creator, the acts, and the results, all at the same time. Practiced in this spirit, in which we become an impersonal instrument of the Master of Works, as Aurobindo writes elsewhere in the same commentary, the art of blessing takes on a totally new dimension, as we will see in chapter 13. Which we're not reading. Blessing means to become the music of love, sending serene and silent strains throughout the turbulent atmosphere of our times, which so many of our contemporaries experience as full of anguish and stress. The golden rule in action. The most amazing application of the golden rule I have ever come across is in the book by Dr. George G. Ritchie, Return from Tomorrow. Ritchie was a doctor with the American troops in World War II. He took part in the liberation of the Holocaust victims in the infamous concentration camps of Nazi Germany, where these victims and many others were kept in subhuman conditions. Ritchie explains that he became acquainted with a Polish prisoner in a camp near Wuppertal. The man was a lawyer with an unpronounceable name, nicknamed Wild Bill Cody by American soldiers because of his long, drooping handlebar mustache, because Wild Bill radiated health, shining bright eyes, an erect posture, boundless energy. Richie assumed he had been brought to the camp shortly before liberation. Fluent in a number of European languages, Wild Bill became an unofficial camp translator, helping the Americans in their numerous tasks. Despite 15 and 16-hour days with a staggering workload, he never showed any signs of weariness. His compassion for the other inmates was endless. Every ethnic group in the camp, between whom there were numerous hate-filled antagonisms, looked upon him as a friend. So Richie was dumbfounded the day he learned that the Polish lawyer had been in the camp since 1939. He was a medical miracle, totally unexplainable in medical terms, at least at that time. For 6 years he had lived in disease-ridden barracks, eating unidentifiable food, surviving in conditions under which thousands of others had either died or been reduced to skeletal vestiges of humanity. Yet there he was in glowing health, without any sign of mental or even physical deterioration. What was his secret? One day over a cup of tea, Wild Bill told Richie his story. At the beginning of the war, he had been living in the Warsaw Ghetto with his wife and 5 children. One day the Nazis arrived on their street, lined everyone against the wall, except the lawyer, because he spoke German, and opened fire with machine guns, killing everyone, his wife and 5 children included, right in front of his eyes. In vain, Wild Bill pleaded to be shot with his family. He paused, perhaps seeing again his wife and 5 children. I had to decide right then, he continued, whether to let myself hate the soldiers who had done this. It was an easy decision, really. I was a lawyer. In my practice, I had seen too often what hate could do to people's minds and bodies. Hate had just killed the 6 people who mattered most to me in the world. I decided then that I would spend the rest of my life, whether it was a few days or many years, loving every person I came in contact with. Wow. An interesting point in this amazing story is that the lawyer's decision to forgive and love was not made on religious grounds in the traditional sense of the word, not as a reply to some religious command or ethical imperative. It was based simply on his observation of life and on the understanding that love regenerates while hate destroys, starting with the one who does the hating. Today, the relatively new medical discipline of psychoneuroimmunology, PNI, a specialty that studies the relationships of the body, nervous system, and psyche, has revealed that expressing love strengthens the body's immune system. In Love, Medicine, and Miracles, our author Bernie Siegel has disseminated this vital insight to a broad public. We are beginning to see more and more the positive physical consequences of living love instead of hate and living in alignment with the golden rule. We follow this rule not because we have to be moral, but because it is the ultimate source of our happiness. The transforming hand of love. Next chapter or subtitle. Returning to the opening quote of this chapter, why would we want to protect aggressors from the ignorance of their misdeeds? Shouldn't they suffer, especially as suffering is often the opportunity for learning much-needed lessons? Even if that is the case, who among us would not prefer to be transformed by the hand of love, of which blessings are the expression, rather than undergo purification by suffering? Those who do wrong amass far greater anger and negativity against themselves than against others. They harm themselves by hardening themselves and simply delay the day when they will have to transcend their malicious or evil thoughts and actions. Once more, we are programmed for perfection, whether we are aware of it or not. No one who is of sound mind could possibly wish suffering or punishment for another. And if the golden rule can enable us to help someone avoid suffering, for example, through the grace of silent blessings, would anyone not wish to use such a wonderful gift and the free opportunity to forward inevitable grace, to borrow William Wordsworth's powerful expression? But, one might object, what about those who consciously plan evil? Not the mentally disturbed person who murders a neighbor in an alcoholic fit in which he has abdicated all self-control, but the respected businessman who uses corruption to gain new markets, or the weapons trader who becomes wealthy from selling anti-personnel mines while his government feigns ignorance. We can learn to bless them in their integrity, which is the very quality they most need to express and seem to lack, because evil is sometimes the highest idea of good some people have. For instance, many young soldiers who are trained to kill believe this is the right way to defend their country. Each one is at each moment at his or her highest level of consciousness. This is key insight in one of the most powerful tools around to liberate us from judging others. For instance, the highest sense of right for a sports champion who is aware that the stimulants he is taking are illegal may be that winning at all costs is the most important pursuit. It represents his ultimate value. At the same time, we need to denounce the evil action in itself, following the old theological distinction, condemn the sin, not the sinner. No real good can ever be achieved at the cost of another human being. However, even the weapons trader, the dictator, or the person dealing in child pornography has a vision of the universe that makes him erroneously believe that he can win at the cost of others losing. If he had a more progressive vision of things, he would rapidly abandon his aggressive behavior. Think of your own life. Have you ever consciously perpetrated evil, knowing that it was self-destructive as well as harmful to others, and persevered in your stance despite the realization that in the long run it was a dead-end road? At some level, evil is always the result of ignorance, deep confusion, or an inability to see. Ignorance of the spiritual laws governing the universe, which transcend all other laws. Ignorance that the path of unconditional love, of obedience to the golden rule, is the ultimate path to happiness, fulfillment, and freedom for all. Ignorance of the fact that sooner or later the harm we do returns to us, frequently with compounded interest. When confronted with evil of this nature, practicing the golden rule through the art of blessing is the most powerful course of action. As a friend once told me, at the bottom of the worst criminal hides a daughter or son of the Creator, ignorant of their divine origin. Only love enables a person who feels at fault, or on the contrary, who is totally convinced of the rightness of their position, to change it. When one is on the defensive, it is very difficult to modify one's point of view, for one only thinks in terms of survival, be it the survival of the little ego or some material privilege. During the long agony of Zimbabwe in 2008 and 2009, when world media were excoriating President Mugabe, who seemed to have literally lost his mind at the cost of untold suffering to his fellow citizens, this friend spent long moments blessing him. As he asked me, how could Mugabe possibly change with this wall of hatred surrounding him? Such an attitude is not only right, it is efficient. It transforms. This is illustrated by a striking story I read a few years ago in the French edition of the Herald of Christian Science, a magazine devoted to spiritual healing. The author, a woman, was walking behind two men in the street. The first man entered a store, and as he walked in, unbeknownst to him, his wallet fell from his pocket. The second man rushed over, picked the wallet up, and examined it, put it into his pocket, and continued his path. The author says that instead of mentally condemning this person, she silently and vigorously affirmed the spiritual integrity of this man made in God's image. She declared that the children of God are honest and that the testimony of the senses is a lie. God's child cannot behave incorrectly. Although her eyes showed her a thief, she affirmed that, deep down, this person's authentic spiritual identity was one with its divine source. Suddenly, the man who had entered the shop and lost his wallet came running out, looking for it everywhere. At that moment, the man who had pocketed it retraced his footsteps, handed the wallet to its rightful owner, and, pointing toward the woman who had been affirming spiritual truth, silently said, "This woman told me to return it to you." Yet the woman had not at any time spoken to him. But let us listen to what the woman concerned had to say about the reality hidden behind the appearance. It was his own reaction to the divine truth which had changed this man's heart. It is important not to entertain negative thoughts about one's neighbor. To love one's neighbor means to acknowledge God's perfect creation in each individual. The next subtitle is The Subjective Nature of Experience. This truly amazing story stresses that behind the facade of material appearances, we inhabit a universe where the mental and spiritual are possibly infinitely more important than we imagine, where people feel and react to our most intimate thoughts, often without either them or us being conscious of it. The awareness of this fact can be very powerful. Jesus mentions it on various occasions, especially when he denounces mental assassination. It reinforces the hypothesis that others are subconsciously capable of reading our secret thoughts. A metaphor will enable us to understand the concept of two simultaneously existing levels of reality or consciousness. The material level, where evil often seems to be happening, and a spiritual level, where a totally different, perfectly harmonious reality reigns. You may have had the experience of taking off in a plane in bad weather. On the ground, it is raining and may be foggy and dark. The plane takes off, rises, and suddenly you are above the clouds in the most brilliant sunshine with a bright blue sky. You have simply changed levels. It is the same in everyday life. For a given person, a specific situation reflects the image of discordance, whereas another person will have a completely different awareness of the same situation. As astrophysicist Hubert Reeves once said, tongue-in-cheek, reality has its own ways of surprising us on all sides. Many studies on perception point to the fact that we see what we believe as often as the contrary. No one can be our enemy, or a total bore, or a pain in the neck, or whatever unflattering names we all occasionally feel like applying to others, unless we ourselves stick such a label upon them. Ultimately, no outside event, encounter, or person can harm us unless we give it the power to do so. This is because all of life is a subjective process of interpretation and definition. Absolutely everything that happens to us in life, everything we are aware of, is filtered through our consciousness, our perception. An event in itself does not exist. We interpret all events, all encounters, every single sensual impression. You might say that in this way, each person creates his or her own reality every day at every single moment. An American friend gave me a striking example of the fundamentally subjective nature of all experience. This story illustrates how a simple declaration of truth, maintained with absolute conviction, can transform an extreme and apparently hopeless situation, while at the same time blessing the aggressor. One of her friends, an attractive young blonde whose figure did not pass unnoticed, decided some years ago to cross Central Park in New York at midnight. Not something any sane woman, or man for that matter, would normally attempt. But this young woman, a devout Christian, had the faith that moves mountains, and especially saw in each person a child of the Creator, whatever the outward appearances might claim to the contrary. At one moment, the inevitable took place. A man pounced on her from behind a bush where he was lurking, threw her violently to the ground, and started tearing at her clothes with evident intentions. Pinned under her aggressor, the young woman repeated slowly with complete poise, "You are a son of God." Completely and dumbfounded, the man just picked himself up and walked away, muttering, "I wonder what he might have been saying to himself." The young woman had possibly never heard of the art of blessing, but to disarm a potential rapist with a simple declaration of truth certainly constitutes one of the most powerful and efficient blessings I have ever heard. What if unconditional love were the normal and rational response of those who have really grasped the idea that the universe and the self is, not are, one? If all is the infinite expression of infinite love, as certain texts of the mystical literature of all time stress, there can be no division anywhere, no separation, only unbroken wholeness. To use the beautiful words of physicist David Bohm. But to live that in everyday life is something else. And he says, on your path to blessing, so this is a small poem or blessing he has. Think of a notorious evildoer alive today and try blessing this person. Think of someone you don't get along with who has hurt you and try blessing this person. How could you live the golden rule more fully in your everyday life? That's the end of that chapter. So thank you for joining us tonight, and what a great way to think about the golden rule. Thank you, Pierre Pradervand, for that reading tonight.